Welcome to the fourth episode of the Music Production Podcast. My name is Brian Funk, also known as AfroDJMac, and I'm here with an episode called To Go Pro or Not to Go Pro. So the question is whether or not you should try to make your music professional, meaning you're going to make money. It's going to be your career. It's going to be the thing that you do. Now, this might sound like a funny question to many of you because probably, if you're like me, you've probably dreamed that one day making music could be your job, the thing you do for work, the thing you do for money, the thing that puts food on the table, supports your family, whatever it is you want to do. And that's really an amazing thing if you're able to do that. You have really, broken through. You're one of the select few that have made that a possibility in your life. So congratulations. But let's just think about if that's what we really want. So I want to take you back in time when I was a young kid. And I think all of us maybe have this feeling when we're young that we're special, that we're going to be discovered, we're going to stand out, we're going to reach great heights. Someday somebody will see our true potential and talents, and we dream big. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's maybe just the ego at work because we are the center of our own world and unaware of that fact as we're young. But when I was a little kid, the first thing I can ever remember wanting to do besides be Superman, literally be Superman, fly around, the first more realistic thing I wanted to do was become a professional baseball player. I loved baseball. Baseball was everything to me. And I was a huge Mets fan, mostly because the Mets were winning in 86, 88. And I'm from New York. But I wanted to be on the Mets. I wanted to be a ball player. I wanted to be a pitcher. And I also wanted to be a home run hitter because those to me were the coolest things. So I played baseball all the time, practiced. I was always out in the street doing it. And as I got a little bit older, it started to occur to me that playing baseball for a living, while, it's a pretty cool thing to do, to get paid, sometimes outrageous amounts of money to play a game, you're playing a lot of baseball. It was more than the whole summer vacation I had, and I never wanted to play baseball every day in summer vacation. Summer vacation was from school was July and August mostly. And I didn't want to play every day. But baseball players, they start the season in early April. And if you're going into the playoffs, you're not finishing up sometimes, if you're lucky, because you're winning, end of October and first week of November. That's a long time. A lot of baseball, and that's almost every day. And you're traveling a lot. You're moving around. And that's not even the whole picture, because there's the off season too. It's not like you're just done playing baseball and you take a break. I mean, you got to stay athletic. You got to stay on top of your game. I kind of realized that at some point, I don't want to really be a baseball player. I want, maybe the glory of it and, to hit a home run with the bases loaded to win the game and have everyone freak out. But I didn't want to put in the work. So baseball kind of sifted away, but I replaced it with something else that I was going to be great for. My ego was ready to do that. And it was to become a cartoonist or comic book artist. And at that point in my life, that was what I was going to do. And I loved to draw. I loved to make my own comics. I made flip books. I had my own characters. And it was a blast. And I would just draw, share it with my friends, and they got a kick out of it. And that was what I wanted to do. But again, I think what started to happen is if you think about the reality of that career, that's drawing all day long, every day, and working hard at it and following maybe the same characters and the same storylines all the time. And I didn't have the attention span or patience for that. I liked drawing my own cartoons and comics, but sometimes I'd start a story and get bored with it and abandon it. We can't really do that if you're doing that kind of work professionally. You got to stick to it. It's sort of maybe in a way it's like a prison where that's the thing you have to do. Moving along, when I turned 14, suddenly it was music. I wanted to do music. I wanted to be a rock star. I wanted to play in front of thousands of people, get that thrill, that rush, have people listen to my music and love it, connect with it, find some meaning in it, just the way music had, done that for myself. And I joined bands, started bands with my friends, and there's been a few at this point by now. But our first band, we were gonna do it. Like that was it. We just knew we were gonna do it, and we played a lot and had a lot of fun. We got a little popular in our high school, and then outside in college, people knew us around the island, Long Island, and it was a great experience. I loved it, but it sort of it took me a few more years than just the first band, but it took a little while to realize that like maybe that's not what I want either. We did a couple tours in various bands where we played for maybe 2 weeks or so, going up and down the East Coast of the United States. And it was so much fun playing a show almost every night, staying in new places, meeting new people. But after 2 weeks, it was pretty grueling and we were kind of ready to go home. We weren't making any money. We were poor. We were eating, cheap food and just getting by, sleeping on floors sometimes in cars. And while we loved it and it was a great bonding experience with my friends, it was nice to get home. I'd be lying if I said it wasn't. Though, after a little bit of time, we were excited to go back out again. It was nice to get home. And I think those experiences kind of made me realize that that's not the life I want to do all year long. I mean, if you're going to be like some pop star sensation, you're going to be on the road all the time. You're going to be promoting your music all the time. You're going to be working on it all the time. You're going to be rehearsing all the time. It's a full-time job, and it's probably more than just your 9 to 5 because there's a lot of people willing to put that effort in. There's a lot of people that want it and are willing to go the extra mile. And going the extra mile is no guarantee you'll get anywhere anyway. So when I look back and I think to like the bands, myself, and just some of the like little indicators that maybe that's not what you want. Like, what are you prioritizing? Sometimes it was just like, there's certain things you'd have to give up. Time with friends, family, girlfriends, whatever. That has to be given up. Some other interests sort of need to be pushed aside. And I look back and see that we weren't willing to do that. As much as we thought we wanted it, the truth is we didn't want it that much to make those sacrifices. So as the last, major effort band I considered myself in broke up, it became clear that I wanted to do something a little bit different, and maybe that's not what I wanted to do. I liked staying at home. I'm a homebody, maybe at heart. I love not going out, not leaving the house. I love taking it easy, hanging out with friends, spending time with my wife. Those are the things I enjoy. The dogs, I couldn't imagine not being around my dogs and my family and friends all the time. So it became clear that maybe that life, although parts of it are awesome, the parts that we kind of see on TV, I guess, the glitz, the glamour, the shows, the crowds, the fans, that's all cool, but not all of it is what I wanted. And you're getting it all when you go pro. So the approach I sort of took, after I started to realize that, and it wasn't like one day, it was a slow realization. It was to do more music at home, do things online more, and much of what you see now from me is a result of that, kind of understanding what my real desires were and what I wanted to do with it. So, the way I've got things going now, where I can stay home, make music, make a podcast like this, and put it out there, and not have to give up a lot of that stuff, that free time, that privacy. I love that. And I have what I would call like a real job, I guess. I teach high school English. I've mentioned this before, but that's the real job. That's the one that really pays the bills and puts the food on the table, and anything that happens with music is really just extra. And that alleviates a lot of stress with music. Because when you make something your sole source of income, like music, art, whatever it is you want to do, now there's a pressure associated with that. It needs to be successful, it needs to make money. So as you do your art, you're going to find yourself making decisions that may make you money or may not make you money, and you have to decide. And I think that would affect your art a lot. There's a lot of pressure. It might not just be picking up your guitar for an hour and just goofing around, having fun, playing whatever comes to mind, or just strumming it for no reason other than you just like sitting on the porch and playing your guitar. Now there's like a goal, a problem, or it's something you have to do, something you have to create. Um, where I'm at now with my music, I have those pressures a little bit, but not any more than I really can deal with. So I've made it a point to, I do my music production club and I put something out every month. So there's something I have to do every month. I like to also make my own music, and I feel like I should kind of live up to the example for the things I say and teach and do. So I want to make music too. But the pressure's not there. I don't have to sell anything. It doesn't even matter. Who cares? You know, I don't have to do that because there is something else that's taking care of the financial side of things. Now, having just moved into a new house and gotten married and all of that stuff and the costs that come along with that, yeah, there's maybe it would be nice to make a little more money doing music, but it's still not the reason I do it. And I think when you go pro, you find yourself sometimes, I'm sure, doing it because you need to feed yourself. So think of just the pressures and how that would change your approach. It may very well make your approach much better. You might be much more productive, I would hope. You would probably have a better handle on what works and what doesn't. And that can be a great thing. And this podcast is not to knock going pro or suggest you don't. I could almost hear people, if they're listening, that might say, I thought this was supposed to be inspirational. What's this all about? Telling me to give up on my dreams. It's not what it is. It's just maybe thinking about it realistically, giving yourself a bit of a reality check. Is your time that you have to do music today going to be you exploring your, self, emotions, some new toy you got, having fun playing around with a friend? Or is it going to be trying to write a jingle for a commercial that you need to land to make some money? And while I could see that being a lot of fun and has been, maybe it's not what you want to do all the time. So a bit of a reality check maybe. And it kind of comes funny to me right now because this particular podcast episode is different than the first 3 I had. And the reason for that is now people know I'm doing it. I've published the podcast. I've promoted it a little bit, sent out emails, told people. Now, and I've heard people were listening and gotten some feedback already. So I know now that it's not just this like fantasy thing I'm doing. So if I can take you through the process, it was like kind of one of the more nerve-wracking things I've done in a while. And in a good way, though, positive stuff. I wasn't like freaking out, having like a panic attack or anything, but I was nervous. And I kind of think of it as like in 3 phases. So at first, this whole idea was just talk. It was, this imaginary thing in my head, going to do a podcast. It's going to be great. I got some ideas. One day I'll sit down and do it. It'll be awesome. Well, I was kind of waiting to get everything right, figure it out, until, maybe about a week ago or so, I just decided to do it. I kind of got it in my head. If I don't just do it, I'm just going to wait until things are perfect, and I'm never going to do it because things will never get perfect. I read a quote from Margaret Atwood, the author. She said, I'm going to mess up the quote, but the gist of it was, if I would wait until I got the perfect first line when I write, I never would have written a word. So she's saying that, if you need something to be perfect, it'll never be, and you'll never do anything. You got to just go correct course along the way, and that's what the podcast is about. So I recorded it. Did 3 episodes at once. I was really excited. I was happy, having a great time. And it was empowering, made me feel good. So after I recorded it, it's still just on my computer, but I was pumped, and I told a few people that, "Oh, I'm doing it. I started already." And that was kind of a fun time because here's this podcast I've recorded. It hasn't been out there. I could talk a little shit about it, say it's going to be cool and great, but no one's heard it. No one knows what it is. No one can critique it. No one can tell me that I can't do this. You're no good. You're not interesting. You're boring. Stop. Shut up. We don't want to hear this. None of that. So that was kind of a fun place to sit for a few days, and I did. And I probably could have got it published a little sooner, but there was a little bit of fear. And finally, I decided to publish it. And that was kind of scary too, because now it's going out there. It's going to be on the internet. People can download it. But the comfort in that was that no one knew. I knew that my podcast would sit in obscurity in iTunes and wherever else because I didn't tell anyone about it. It's not like people just come to these things. They got to know about it. They got to hear about it. So it was still kind of a safe place. So it was published for a few days before I decided to really say anything about it. And that was the scariest part. I composed an email about it and kind of sat on that email for like a day or two. Didn't send it out right away. I decided it needed to be proofread many times, That was just a lie. That was me just resisting the the send button and ultimately facing the potential that people would listen to this and hate it, not like it, find me annoying, decide to unsubscribe from my music production club, take my bookmark off their internet browser, whatever, unsubscribe from YouTube. So I waited on that. When I finally sent it out, it was just kind of like, okay, let's see what happens. It was a little nerve-wracking. But I've gotten good feedback from it, which is really cool. Some people have reached out and said they enjoyed it. They like the idea. They think it's some interesting topics. And probably the best thing to me, as far as like validation goes, would be that there's some people that asked to be on the show and to talk with me. And I would assume that if you thought my show sucked, you wouldn't want to be on it. Give yourself a bad name. So that was really cool, and I'm super excited about that. So I can tell you there will be some guests coming on soon, talking about all kinds of things, and again, I want this to be unrehearsed and natural, so we'll kind of just see where it goes. I'm not going to think of it so much as an interview, but more as a conversation. So this idea of going pro, I guess, I had this thought and decided to go pro with it. And it was scary. There was a fear it wouldn't be good, but there was also like a fear of success too. And I really kind of heard a great talk from Seth Godin. He was on a podcast called The Moment podcast with Brian Koppelman. He was on it 3 times actually. And he started talking about success and this idea that like a lot of struggling artists like being struggling artists. There's this fear of success. So once you're successful, think about it. You put out a great track. Everyone loves it. Well, now where's the next one? Can you do that again? Can you reach that level? Can you make another thing? Was that just an accident? Did you just get lucky? That pressure is huge. Think of all the Software Slump albums you've heard in your life, where it was just a fluke. Like, yeah, they had a great album. They had 20 years to write it, and they made it. And then when they had to come up with an album in the next year, it wasn't as good. That's a scary thing, and no one wants to feel like they're just like a flash in the pan, one-hit wonder. So people often use the fear of success as a reason not to succeed. This is what Seth Godin is saying, and it really kind of resonated with me, that there's comfort in struggling. It's kind of fun to be the struggling artist, isn't it? You're this person, you've painted this image of yourself, you have potential. One day it's going to come out, you're working on it. Oh, I can't really tell you what it's about yet, but trust me, one day. There's a lot of intrigue that goes with that. It sounds cool to people, and creates a little curiosity. And there's really a tribe of people like you, to use another Seth Godin term, tribe. There's a tribe of people just like you, other struggling artists. You can go out and see them. You can go to your open mic nights and play music with them and talk to them about the struggle and conspiracies about the the world and how it is poised to ensure your own failure. That, it's who you know, not what you know, all these kinds of things. It's a great way to bond with people because it takes a little bit of the responsibility off of yourself, and it creates a sort of us against them perspective. Like, yeah, us, us underground guys, we're the better ones, and I've bought into this a million times in my life too. It's fun, that like this thing that's going out into the bigger picture, it sucks, and we give it terms like selling out. And I almost feel like I need to explain selling out these days. Back in the, I think back to just say the 90s, there were some bands, like take a band like Nirvana, just doing what they were doing, raw. Even when they made it big on Nevermind, and Nevermind was a huge shock to the music world. It was in the middle of glam rock, hair metal. This great big glamorous thing comes the grunge movement. Well, Nevermind was a pretty slick record. If you listen to it, it was pretty slick. I mean, a lot different than what was being put out at the time. But if you compare it to some of Nirvana's peers, it was pretty slick. And they got a little heat for selling out. Even though what they were doing was so far off from what the mainstream thing was. You'll get that heat. Success will get you called a sellout. Even if you're like kind of not selling out, which I would argue for Nirvana, just maybe because I love them. But that by calling someone a sellout kind of justifies your position as the struggling artist. It's like you're above selling out, and that's why you're here. And yeah, they took the shortcut. They took the easy way. You wouldn't even want to be like that anyway if you had the chance. And probably the truth is you really don't. You just say that. So when you're the struggling artist, no one can judge you. In fact, they might even look at you as noble for holding on to your principles and your dignity and not giving in to any pressures of money and success and fame. And on top of that, potential's fun. It's fun to have potential. This idea of possibility, like one day, man, have your friends say, yo, this guy's gonna be big one day. That's a cool feeling. It's exciting. There's so much possibility, and there's no necessarily, downside. There's no, no one says, this guy's gonna be great, man, but then he's gonna peter out on his second album. You don't really hear it that way. It's just one day, if only the world was different, people, the mainstream media, whatever. These excuses, kind of help define ourselves. Seth Godin has a great talk on that. Again, it's called The Moment Podcast with Brian Koppelman. He was on 3 times, Seth Godin. After the first one I heard, I went back and listened to the other 2 in reverse chronological order, which was kind of fun because you get to hear these 2 guys they know each other kind of well in the third one, and then by the first one, the host is mispronouncing Seth Godin's name. So you get to see the evolution of the friendship. So I recommend listening to that. I think you might find it really, really interesting. I sure did. So this idea to go pro or not to go pro. The title is an allusion to the to be or not to be speech in Hamlet. Now, I am going to talk a little bit about Shakespeare, and maybe this is a little scary to do because as a high school teacher, I know no better way to turn off a room of 30 people than mention the name Shakespeare. You get all kinds of groans, but I promise that this is relevant to our talk, and there's a pretty good lesson in here. I mean, why else would people care about Shakespeare 500-600 years about, that long later since he existed? Why would they still be talking about him if his words and ideas didn't mean something? So I want to talk to you about it a little because I think it applies to this idea of going pro or not. So if you're not familiar with the story of Hamlet, I'll give you a really brief, not even as good as Cliff's Notes summary. Hamlet is the prince of Denmark, and his father is murdered. And right after his father's murdered, his uncle marries his mom. Uncle Dad now we have. So Hamlet's uncle, Claudius, becomes the king, marries the queen. And Hamlet's really upset about this. His mom is remarried so soon. Maybe this is understandable. And to the uncle, like, come on, there's themes of, you know, the well, I'm not even gonna get to the other themes. I gotta watch myself here, but there's that going on. But then Hamlet is visited by the ghost of his father, who tells Hamlet that your uncle killed me. Your uncle killed your father, killed me. So it's really shocking, upsetting. Hamlet's mad. He wants revenge. He's even more mad at his mom. There's also that kind of fun question that is unanswered. Was the mom somehow involved? But anyway, Hamlet is going to seek revenge just as the ghost of his father has asked him to. And this is sort of where Hamlet becomes a story of inaction or the consequences of action. Hamlet could go out and get revenge. A ghost visited you, your dad. Come on, man. What else do you need? Go get your revenge. But he remains in inaction for so long in the play. And if you think about it, there's a lot of comfort there. For one, Hamlet can remain prince. He doesn't have to become king. I'm sure there's a lot of pressure in becoming the king. Think of becoming king as almost like being famous, in music. Hamlet gets to sit around and feel justified in his anger for much longer if he doesn't do this act of killing his uncle right away. So there's like some benefits he gets, right? And, first the ghost visits him, then Hamlet decides he's going to create a play in which the murder of his father is basically acted out, and he's going to watch his uncle and see if his uncle reacts weird. And if his uncle acts weird because this is exactly what he did to his dad, then he'll know. Then Hamlet can kill his uncle in revenge for his father's death. So great, the play goes on, and that's exactly what happens. So Hamlet's going to kill his uncle. But then he goes, finds his uncle, and his uncle's praying now. And then Hamlet decides, oh, well, if I kill him now, he's going to go to heaven. And then, what revenge is that? I want him to go to hell. So he doesn't kill his uncle then, so he gets to put it off even longer. Hamlet has this question, the play Hamlet has this fun question you can toy around with of whether or not Hamlet is actually insane or if he's faking it. And it's a fun thing, it's sort of like, is this person, this artist really talented enough, or are they faking it? It's that potential thing we were talking about before. So Hamlet is in this state of like, what is he? And it buys him more time again to just be like that struggling artist, with that potential. He's got this grievance against his uncle. And, he gets to have this anger now and be all weird about it and like taunt him and stuff like that for longer instead of just doing it, getting his revenge. So you always wonder if he's crazy, and you kind of wonder like if this struggling artist is, oh man, is this guy really going to make it? Yeah, he talks a good game. He's working on this big project. Is he going to make it? So it comes to the to be or not to be speech. And I'm actually going to read it because I think it's fun to look at the parallels with this idea of going pro and what the theme of the speech is, and it's one of the big lessons of the play. So, bear with me. I'm hoping this is, not boring you to tears as it does sometimes to the average high school student, but it does relate to our discussion of music production, at least in my own head. And I'm taking a little risk here with this. So let me read this to you. I'll try not to, I'm not going to act it out so much, but I will try to emphasize it just so the understanding is clear. So here it is, to be or not to be. To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether it is nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing end them, to die, to sleep no more, and by a sleep to say we end the heartache and the thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished, to die, to sleep, perchance to dream. There's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil must give us pause. There's the respect, that calamity of so long life. For who would bear the whips and scorns of time, the oppressor's wrong, the proud man's contumely, the pangs of despised love, the law's delay, the insolence of office, and the spurns that patient merit of the unworthy takes, when he himself might his quietus make with a bare bodkin? Who would Fardels bear to grunt and sweat under a weary life, but that the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no travelers return, puzzles the will and makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to others that we know not of. Thus, consequence does make cowards of us all. And thus, the native hue of resolution is sicklier over the pale cast of thought, and enterprises of great pith and moment, with this regard, their currents turn awry and lose the name of action. So what does that all mean? Hamlet is basically saying here, should I live or die, to be or not to be? Live or die, right? Well, is it noble to suffer the misfortunes of life? Is that a noble thing to do? To suffer them? To live through them? Say, yeah, I've toughed it out. Or is it more noble to just kill yourself and not deal with that? Die. End the 1,000 natural shocks that the body is prone to. And he says, death, this is something we should wish for, to die, to sleep, to end everything, not have to suffer. P.S. Hamlet's a pretty dark play. It is a tragedy, so everybody dies. So this is a dark take on life and, the struggle. But if we look at it in that lens, he's saying, maybe we should just end our lives and not deal with all the crap life gives us. And then we die, and we get to dream, and we get to move on to something else. But then he says, but that's the problem. We don't know what we'd move on to. We don't know what's next when we die. And he says, why would we put up with all this crap? The oppressor, scorns of time, despised love, how long justice takes. Why would we put up with that when we could just stab ourselves with a dagger and end it? So why put up with that? And he says, basically, because when you go to the country of death, no one returns. You don't get to come back. If death sucks, you're there. You're not coming back to life. And he says, and that makes us all cowards because we'd rather deal with the horrible situation we have than trade it for something that may be better or may be worse. Kind of the old expression, the devil you know is better than the devil you don't know, something like that, where, the problems you have, you'd probably rather have than trade them for some other unknown problems. And Hamlet basically ends to be or not to be, saying we're cowards. And you know what? This fear of moving on into this other world, that ends all our dreams. That ends all our action. So if we take this speech, to be or not to be, and we apply it to go pro or not to go pro, you're comfortable. We're comfortable in being the struggling artist. We know what that means. We know there's people there that support us. There's the ride up, right? The only place you can go is up. But to leave that status of struggling artist and move forward into something bigger, that's scary, man. You don't know what that's going to mean. It's the unknown. And maybe many of us never get there, not because we're not good enough. I mean, come on. I'm sure you've probably, as a musician, seen famous musicians or heard songs and you thought, my track is better than that. Or I can play guitar better than him. I'm sure you've thought that, but that's not the point, right? It's not a contest. This idea that if we move on past the struggling artist, if we go pro, maybe that's a scarier place than not being pro. Maybe then your time of making music will be made making songs you don't like for people you don't care about, or companies, or you're not interested in selling products you're not excited about. Who knows? It's unknown. Could be the greatest thing in the world. It could be what you've seen on TV and all those music videos, partying, glitz and glamour. But it could also be another kind of hell. And what Hamlet says is we tend to prefer the hell we know than the one we don't. So think about maybe, is going pro what you really want? And is it an advantage? Will your art be better if you're going pro, if you are making money off it? Will you be more satisfied with your body of work if you were making money off of it? And maybe your own personal feelings about it, your own beliefs and aesthetics are compromised. And maybe there's a lot more people with their hands in on your work. Producers telling you to shorten the chorus, change the lyric. People telling you that you can't behave a certain way in public, or you must behave a certain way in public. You must wear certain clothing. You must, oh man, I mean, the list could go on, right? It's a little scary. Maybe we like not being pro. Maybe it's an advantage. Maybe it's better for art to not be pro. Think about this. Maybe Shakespeare aside, but many of our great artists, our great writers in history weren't making their livings off of their art. It was just something they did. A lot of them did other things in the meantime. We didn't have this celebrity culture. We didn't have the things we have today where you can really make your image a big thing. You can reach all these people. You didn't get to reach all those people back then, not like we do today. Maybe some of the great writers wouldn't have been so great if they found fame and fortune. Maybe they wouldn't have had the same struggles. Maybe they wouldn't have been able to tap into the same parts of human emotion. I mean, let's be real. Like, listen to some of the songs on the radio. Are they all that deep? Or some of them are just about making money, getting girls, you know, how cool you are, how tough you are. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm being the struggling artist here by critiquing it, but is that really adding to our, you know, humanity, our art, our culture? I'm not so sure. Don't get me wrong. I like to dance around to a silly song that might not mean much, and sometimes I don't want to always question my existence and think about deep issues. Sometimes there's a time and place for music that is sort of hedonistic and just for the fun of it. And a lot of times that's the kind of music I like. But would the great works of art be the same without those struggles? Is that why maybe some of those bands and artists you know had that great first record, then they found fame, and then the music suffered? Is that why? Is it because now they have the comfort? Or is it other factors? Could be interesting. I don't think some of the most famous people in the world, some of the biggest stars, get to live normal lives. Does Madonna get to go to the supermarket, pick up some onions, call home and ask if she needs to get anything else without being bothered? Does she get to do that? I don't know. I think she's pretty well known everywhere she goes. Maybe I'm wrong, but I can tell you from my own experience as a high school English teacher, and please don't get me wrong, I love my students. It's why I do it. It's because I get to work with them. But I can't go to certain malls and shopping centers anymore because I get recognized and I'm just trying to do my daily business. And it's not that I don't want to see people. It's just I kind of just want to not be bothered and be anonymous and just do things and not have to worry about what people are thinking about me, or maybe paying attention to what store I'm going into or what I'm buying, and then thinking about that's just too much. Like it, and this might all be in my head, but that's where I live, I guess, is in my head. So those thoughts can be kind of oppressive. And I've come to realize that I don't want that fame. I don't want to be walking out of a store and have the TMZ guy come up to me and then try to make a joke about how, you know, I was buying dog food and toilet paper. That to me is just, I don't know if I could deal with that. I'd lose my mind. I'm always a little surprised when people are so shocked when celebrities freak out on camera, because I feel like that would happen to me much sooner than it did for many of them. They're probably all really good at dealing with that. And I couldn't imagine all of my shortcomings, flaws being broadcast around the world if I trip because I'm walking, not paying attention to what I'm doing, and it gets caught on camera. Like, I don't need a meme of myself out of that. It must be kind of tough to live that way. It must be tough to always be having the best expected of you, even when you're not at your best, when you're sick, when you're tired. I read a interview a while back with Paul McCartney, and I think it was in Guitar World. And whoever was interviewing Paul McCartney was kind of an asshole, if you ask me. But he was kind of giving Paul McCartney a hard time. He's like, Paul, you wrote Eleanor Rigby, you wrote Yesterday. And then he brings up like some obscure like Paul McCartney song, like it's not that great. Like I think it was Hell on Wheels or Hell in Wheels. He's like, and then you write Hell in Wheels. What the hell? You know, it's kind of like the question, like, how do you do that? And Paul, and you know, this is one of the reasons I love him and all his work and the Beatles. He handled it with such grace, and he just said, well, you know, I doubt any artist's work is always at their best. You know, you can't hold any any piece of their work up to their best piece all the time. Because you're never always at your best, you know, because that's your best. You know, sometimes you get lucky, you strike gold, you write Yesterday. Sometimes you come up empty-handed and you write some throwaway songs. But what's great about Paul McCartney, and a lot of guys like him that have stuck around and still made some good music from time to time, is that they kept going. You know, they didn't let those failures or those, or I don't even want to call them failures, just the fact that every song Paul wrote after Yesterday wasn't better than Yesterday. That didn't stop him, you know, because we have this idea that, you know, you should always get better and better. But what happens when you write Yesterday? That song you're not going to write a better song than that. How? How do you do that? You know, it's already there. It's perfect. It's a perfect song, if you ask me. And a lot of his songs were perfect songs, but you don't always get that lucky. The talent doesn't always come through. You know, no athlete makes, you know, a three-pointer every time. If you're a baseball player, if you're batting 300, which means you're failing 70% of the time. If you're batting 300, which means you get a base hit 3 out of 10 times, you're doing great. You're doing great. So there's a lot of like pressures with going pro, and I'm sure that it probably kills a lot of people's drive and a lot of artists' ability to create when they do something really nice and then they feel the pressure to do something better and feel they can't do it. I'm sure you've had the experience of making a track where you have an idea, maybe you like it at first, but then after a few minutes you get tired of it, you don't like it anymore. It's this baby idea, you know, this little thing that maybe didn't get the chance it needed because you got distracted by something else that you thought was better. Imagine if your work was some of the most celebrated music of the 20th century. You know, and that interviewer, I think it was Guitar World, because that was just one of the magazines I read as a kid. That was kind of uncalled for. That wasn't cool. That was sort of like a journalist, I guess, if he is a journalist or she is a journalist. Kind of just, you know, I don't know, picking on someone. Finding a way to deride a person that is unfair and, you know, uncalled for. But if you're at that level, there's people out there. There's people that want to embarrass you, that people that want to call you out, people that want to see you fail. You know, once you get to the top of the mountain, then everyone wants to knock you down. And we all know that the media likes to do that. It's a great story. It's an interesting, provocative tale of someone that we thought was great, and we find out they're just a regular guy like us. So to go pro or to not go pro, that is the question. There's no right answer, as always. So I'd like to thank you guys for listening, and I've sort of decided that it'd be kind of cool to leave you with what they would call in the marketing world a call to action, but something to do now that you listened. And I'm going to say listen to those Seth Godin podcasts on the Moment podcast. It's the Moment podcast with Brian Koppelman, and Seth Godin is the guest. Seth Godin writes something interesting every single day. It's his thing. He writes a blog post every day, sometimes real short, sometimes long, but it's always got something interesting to say. And if you're not familiar with Seth Godin, he is great inspiration to anyone that's an artist or anyone that wants to better themselves in some way. Highly recommended. I listen to everything he says once I see it. So I subscribe to his blog, and I ate up those podcasts, and he's a good thinker. So my call to action is go listen to the Moment podcast of Brian Koppelman and Seth Godin. And I want to thank you guys for listening to this podcast. This has been a lot of fun. I'm loving doing this already, and I'm really excited about some of the preliminary feedback and the fact that there are people that actually want to be on the show. Well, this is not a show, I guess, but that want to talk and just share their thoughts. So we got some cool things coming up. I'm at least things I'm going to think is cool. And that's kind of the guiding principle here. I want a podcast that I'm going to like, that I would want to hear. So there you have it. That's it. Thanks for listening to me read some Shakespeare, and I hope it applied to your life like it has to so many people for so many hundreds of years. All the best, and take care.